Another disorder classified as an anxiety disorder is something called panic disorder. And whilst you might not have heard of panic disorder, my assumption is that many of you have heard of what panic disorder is marked by, which are panic attacks. Um, Someone who has panic disorder experiences panic attacks, which are unpredictable, minutes long episodes of, and then you can see all of the symptoms listed, which collectively are symptoms of what we would call panic. So what does panic feel like? Well, it's an expression of anxiety, so it feels both physiological as well as emotional. You feel a sense of intense dread, sort of like an impending doom. You don't know what you're fearful of, you don't know what you're dreading, but you're just overwhelmed with this feeling that something bad is happening. Terror certainly is associated with panic attacks. So those are some of the emotional components. But then going along with it, you can experience chest pain. That can come in a couple of forms: a stabbing chest pain, a feeling like your chest is closing in on you and it becomes difficult to breathe. You can feel like you're choking, like your throat is closing and it's difficult again to get air. Your body just sort of feels like it's turning against you, like it's attacking you in some ways. And then other frightening sensations, you can lose feeling sometimes in your extremities. You start to cycle and to escalate into just this state of overwhelming panic, and so that's why it's called panic disorder. Um, your book describes panic attacks sort of like being struck by an anxiety tornado, and this speaks to the fact that these attacks are unpredictable. They sort of come out of nowhere, strike without warning, completely wreak havoc on whatever you're doing and on you, and then they disappear. And so whilst you're in the throes of a panic attack, it can feel like it's never going to end, and this causes your anxiety to just escalate and escalate and escalate. And then when it finally does end, you realize, or sometimes you realize, it only lasts sometimes a couple of minutes. But whilst you're in the middle of it, it feels like it is unending. Panic attacks and panic disorder is decently common. It affects about 1 in 75 people, which is a pretty high incidence rate. There are a couple of behavioral choices that can increase the likelihood that you will suffer from panic attacks. Smokers' risk, for example, is more than doubled. And I think some of this has to do with the fact that if you smoke, you are first putting a stimulant into your body, oftentimes, and then also you are changing your ability to breathe. And so you're already ultimately breathing in a more shallow manner and sometimes in like a quicker manner in order to get oxygen into your lungs. And so, just like we saw with generalized anxiety disorder and caffeine, this can mimic what panic attacks feel like. And so, sometimes by putting your body in that state of shorter breathing and difficulty breathing, can start to trigger a panic attack. So, what I'm going to have you do now to sort of just get a better understanding of what panic feels like for someone who suffers from it is I'm going to have you watch a video clip of Jonathan Knight on Oprah a couple years back, talking about his experiences with anxiety and with panic. And then I want you to pay attention to what he says panic feels like, because I think he does a really good job of talking about that. But then I also want you to hear how he, like many other people who suffer from anxiety disorders, especially panic attacks, started to deal with his panic attacks, and I air quote deal, like he started to deal with them because he used maladaptive coping mechanisms. Sometimes people who have panic attacks start to become so concerned they're going to experience these panic attacks when they're out in public or when they're somewhere where they can't just be by themselves, that they start to isolate themselves. And the way that they cope with their panic is they just turn inwards and they start to stay in their house. And they become really what we might call agoraphobic. They don't want to be anywhere where they can't control their situation and their environment if they do have a panic attack. And so we do see a comorbidity, we would call it, where like two disorders occur together of panic attacks, as well as potentially an agoraphobia, maybe a social anxiety. So I want you to pay attention to what he describes panic feeling like, but I also want you to be considering how he coped with it, but his coping was what we would call maladaptive, that it reduced his anxiety, but definitely to the detriment of his normal everyday functioning. So I'll link you to that video in the comments below this, and you only have to watch about 5 or so minutes, but feel free to watch the whole thing.